Right. Okay, thanks everyone. Sorry about that being a quick coffee break, but we've got a lot to pack in today. There we go. I need a bell, don't I? Where was that from previous years? So yeah, so now we're moving on to our data and database sort of collection tools workshop. So the electrofishing database is quite a staple of SFCC, and we've got quite a lot of new faces in the sector. So I thought it'd be good to have a very quick session just to highlight the current resources that are out there in relation to the database. And also we have Esri on the call, who are going to do an overview of data collection tools, but also what you can do with the GIS outputs from the current database. So with that, I will try and fire through this as we're a little bit behind. So as I just said, many new people in the sector. Electrofishing is a large part of our work. We have over 32,000 records in the electrofishing database, which is fantastic. So that's doubled since Sean Dugan did the original tutorial videos back about 9 or 10 years ago. So we do hold an incredible wealth of data in there. So it allows for input, secure storage, which is the key part. Organizations can sometimes fall apart if staffing or other stuff just doesn't work out, but the data is still securely held and accessible for whoever comes next. So that's one of the real benefits we have. You can export in various formats, which I'll go over in a bit, and share data with other organizations that also have access to the database. And online support from SFCC myself. So a couple years ago, back in 2018, there was a bit of an issue in the company that runs the software. Were going to discontinue support for adding new functionality, and then they were going to discontinue hosting. So there was a bit of a buzz about what we were going to do to resolve this and what we were going to do in the long term. The license was later bought over by a company called Rockpool Solutions, and that's composed of the developers who originally worked on the database back when it was built. So Rockpool are a really good company, and SFCC has quite a good relationship with them. Not for the most part for Sean's efforts in the past, keeping up with Gordon and Stuart. But where we are now is back in sort of a couple of years ago, interim hosting arrangements were made, but we're now hosted on Microsoft Cloud in Azure. But the end result is that the current database arrangement is secure. This rug is not going to be pulled out from under us. So the current arrangement works, and it will work for the foreseeable future. So I thought, given that that's gone on in the background, it would just be good to sort of give an update on that and make sure everyone knows where we are. So what resources are there out there to help you if you're new coming into the sector and looking at this? So as I mentioned, some years ago, Sean Dugan made some YouTube tutorial videos. The only thing that's really out of date is his contact email, but they're still really good resources that will show you how to add new rivers, create new sites, add events, and goes over the different levels of users, senior biologists, ordinary assistant biologists, and there's admin levels that don't really go into on those YouTube contents. Within the database, there is a document library, so there's a training manual for the database, but there's also an Excel dictionary. So you've seen all the different outputs you get from the database, and in particular, the GIS export has quite a frightening number of columns, and you sort of know what most of them are, but for new people coming into this, it'd be quite scary to look at all those columns and try and figure out what they mean. So that's the sort of screenshot of the document library within there. We've got the team leader manual, PDFs on the database, and that database dictionary. So that one's been recently updated, but it has been sent out a couple of years ago. but I would recommend having a look at this Excel file to refresh yourselves. And the YouTube videos are on the FMS YouTube. So there's our homepage, and you'll see there's the electrofishing database tutorials. So lesser use functionality, Faye's smiling at me here, is the capability to record information on individual fish. This is the way that Marine Scotland's fish obs works. Instead of sort of aggregating numbers of fish into lengths, they record each individual fish, and that's really good for the traceability of scales and genetics for future work. But we can do this currently. So in 2018, this was revisited and redeveloped for NEPs so that the genetic scale packet numbers could be added in. But also quite interesting here, we have spaces for tag type and tag number. And with my sort of previous hat on the Kyle, we did a lot of pit tagging. So if you're out doing electrofishing surveys, say you're pit tagging par, the previous autumn, but not all of them smolted, and you pick some up, you'd be able to record tags detected this way. As I mentioned there, good for pit tags, but you could use this for other tag types as well if you're using elastomer or acoustic or pit tags. And I think with some modifications, the database could record your tagging events, your initial lists of fish when they're tagged. It would require some development, but I think there's possibly something in it there. We have a lot of different export types. The most common one is the fish GIS that allows you to import the data straight into a map. And Esri will show us a couple of different ways of actually using that. But we have some other very short exports here, CSVs. They produce much less columns than the fish GIS export does. And they're really good for just focusing on whatever particular question. If you're using a lot of time sites, then it will be the catch per unit effort one you might want to look at. If it's just fish density, then that will generate a sort of a shorter report, and same for the habitat one. So there's lots of different options there, and if you've not had a play around with them, play around and see what works, and use it in conjunction with the Excel dictionary file. So a couple of screenshots, because Sean only showed me this very recently and I didn't know it existed, which was absolutely bizarre. And I was like, how? Because this is a really, really good resource actually. So it will tell you what each column is, but give you the description, tell you if it's also calculated by the database, if it's mandatory when you're inputting, and any known issues with that particular field. So that's one from the individual fish. So we've got tag type and tag number fields in there. This is from the GIS export, but when I started the Kyle looking at this, I'm like, what on earth does that column mean? I wouldn't have thought, oh, one run minimum density estimate, but again, I wanted to highlight this dictionary as a resource because I think that's really, really useful. And even for the habitat fields, we have more survey notes, salmon access. You can probably work out some of them, but it's just nice to have that as a backup, so you're definitely interpreting the database outputs in the way you think. I've had a couple slides from Rockpool Solutions as well. They've inputted into this with their expertise on working on the database. So we have quite a bespoke arrangement, and the database has been built using their sort of proven techniques. Sorry, this is a little bit sales pitchy, but it's quite valuable having come from Rockpool itself. They usually, or their main customer base is more for organizations providing care. So they have other databases for sort of work rotas and that sort of thing, which is where they come from. But those other customers have been getting Rockpool to further develop their databases. So they've not been quite static. They've been developing the toolkit for updating their offerings and streamlining things as well. And yeah, as they say, they can be agile, achieve some nice quick wins. So I think the point of that is if we want to look at making the database a bit easier to use, a bit more user-friendly, there are some really easy things they can do. It doesn't need to be, a 2-year working group review sort of option, and always working collaboratively. So a couple examples of some apps that they've created. So this is a mobile app for one of their care providers. It looks quite modern and it's quite user-friendly. They've created work rotas for the same organization as well, and sort of profile details. This was a little bit difficult because none of their other customers do anything quite like what we do. So finding a relevant example of updates was quite difficult. But hopefully it will give you an idea. If we wanted to look at app development, then the capability is there to do so. So they've suggested some potential refinements, or rather ways to go about refinements. The database has successfully been in place for over 12 years, but it does look a little bit dated. It's just inevitable. It's just that time has gone on. So there may be some opportunities to simplify the data entry process. Alongside, we could optimize display for mobile data collection, and that would give us a lot more synergy with the GIS apps that we're using. Although I think some people are still a bit nervous about taking electronic devices out into the field, which is understandable. But if the demand was there, we could look into it. And if any further refinements or functionality is required, Rockpool have recommended that we have a workshop to really sort of start at the beginning and look how people interact with the database, how data entry starts and what the main needs are, and then work from there to see what refinements we could do. So you have your data from the database in a GX export. What do you do with it now? Well, it's good to see Faye here, because the first thing I would recommend and point towards is the NEPS electrofishing data analysis tool Shiny app. So you can compare your observed densities from your electrofishing site against the national benchmark density. And personally, I think this is a really good way to give meaning to your electrofishing results. Is the site performing well or not, or performing exceedingly well? And you get some really nice maps that will tell you either as a proportion or percentage of the benchmark what your observed density is. But you can also do some really nice visual displays of the data using ArcGIS.